Friends, family, listeners, we are gathered here today to honour the memory of Blake Thorburn's humanity, who after a brief illness has unfortunately passed. Ever since it was originally trimmed from the Thorburn air only a few short weeks ago, Blake's humanity has taken root in all of our hearts, blossoming into an example of what we all could and should be. Blake always rose to every occasion that was laid out before him, never looking back, but always growing forward and upward. Even though it has now passed, Blake's humanity will live on in our hearts, and also perhaps, maybe a little in whatever the fuck he's turned himself into now. Blake's humanity will live on in his familiar, Evan, who can maybe talk some fucking sense into him, please.
This is Deep In Pact, a proud member of the Duff Network, where we dive deep into Wildbow's most besieged work 5 years on. You just heard Elliot Diebold.
And that was Ruben Morehouse.
And we are back to talk about Duress 12.6, the episode in which Blake finally abandons any pretense of not just being a boogeyman.
Oh god, you make it sound like it's a good thing.
Well, I don't know. It's good if you like killing behemoths, so we all like that, right?
It's perhaps arguably better than whatever limbo he's been in for the past 2 arcs, I suppose.
Yes, he was definitely in between, and kind of talking himself both into and out of doing this. So if you like if you ascribe to the methodology of it's better to just rip off the Band-Aid, then, I mean, that's what this is, right?
Yeah, but it still took him 2 arcs to do it.
Yeah, so look, that happens towards the end of this chapter. Spoiler alert. So let's we'll talk about it more when we get there. But at the opening of 12.6, the goodies are at the top of the tenements, ready to go back through the portal into the real world. And of course, Ava has already run through.
I mean, let's be honest. I think that's the smartest play of the day. I know her brother's been poisoned or whatever, but she read the room and realized things here just keep getting worse. I mean, there's also a nice little bit where Roxanne seeks up for Catherine, and it's a bit heartwarming. But really the big thing is, right from the start of this chapter, we're already seeing what defines the chapter, which is Blake is just, I mean, he's like he's like moving to avoid Alexis. He's barely able to track like the conversations that are going on in the room. He's just falling apart after what he learned at the end of last chapter.
Yeah. Yeah, man, I'm so excited to talk about it because there's so much here to talk about with Blake's complete loss of his humanity, right? But before we get to that, let's talk about all this stuff. I think one of the other notes of this chapter that I really like is these beats of the Thorburns, all understanding each other and getting each other on a level that is incomprehensible to anybody who isn't a Thorburn.
Which is maybe, I mean, I'm just grasping at any straw of somebody who could bring Blake back towards humanity a bit. And as you said, like the Thorburns do that to each other a number of times. Maybe one of them can do it to him. Yeah,
although it seems to be a bit too late. But if anyone can do it, Peter can. There's this interesting part where Tiffany talks about how one of the windows they climbed past looked exactly like her house, and the people inside it looked familiar, presumably implied being it was her family.
Yeah.
And everyone else is like, what? We didn't pass anything like that, which is great. And another point in favor of the Abyss just being the best setting from any story. Green Eyes says that it's probably or possibly the Blackfish, which I think, based on what we know of Tiffany, feels correct.
I'd say this is a pretty safe bet. I agree. Like, I think Green Eyes probably hit the nail on the head. I mean, what stood out to me here, though, is, Tiffany's, from the looks of it, one of the few people who's being targeted this quickly. Like, and I guess, assuming the Abyss has some sort of intelligence to it, why Tiff?
Yeah, it must mean that Tiffany is closest to the edge, right? The edge of becoming a boogeyman.
Yeah.
Because, targeting Roxanne and Catherine, they get targeted by, some kind of others, presumably.
What's interesting, like to tie it back to sort of what Blake went through down here, Tiffany, and so let's just jump to her. Let's just do Roxanne's bit here as well while we're on the topic.
Sure.
So Tiffany gets targeted by the Blackfish, which for Blake was the stuff in his past, and that really makes sense for Tiff. And I think, we were just talking about how well we thought Tiff was doing with all this, seemingly, compared to Toronto, but maybe she's just putting up a good face.
Yeah.
Whereas when Blake had the dreams, it was about his future, and so presumably, like, that's where it ties into Roxanne, because I think, Roxanne's a little fucking psycho, so it makes sense that the drains, or not the drains, the abyss might have a lot to pull from her future, and where she's heading, to sort of confront her with.
Yeah, I mean, it's temptation, right? It really is, or at least that's what it was for Blake. I could really easily see the abyss tempting Roxanne with, hey, this is what could come to pass if you just let us, drip bugs into your ears or whatever the fuck it wants to do to her.
Yeah, I mean, we don't get too many details, but she's clearly very shaken up by whatever bug-related things it was showing to her. So it may have been less temptation and more just using the dreams to show, I don't know, something about how filling her with bugs is awful and she shouldn't want that. I don't know. I don't understand how the abyss works every time, but I know it's not good.
If Roxanne became a boogeyman, she would basically become the skitter boogeyman, I think that's what's trying to be hinted to us here.
Of course, yes.
Yeah. Anyway. So Blake, is basically the first half of this, the entirety of this chapter, really, is Blake struggling to kind of contain his anger over this vision. And any time he interacts with any of the Cabal, it basically threatens to send him over the edge of anger into full-on boogeyman territory.
Yeah, I mean, he's completely off axis. He's kind of spiraling right from the start of the chapter. In these early bits, the narration is putting words like friend as a label for Alexis in quotes. He doesn't trust sort of anything they're saying. Like, he's finding the sort of terrible read of everything they say, which I actually think is unfair, but we'll touch on that. And then he finds himself wishing he still had that spiritual connection to Alexis, so he could tap into her feelings and understand what she's feeling, which is like, we were just sort of talking 2 chapters ago about how amazing and impressive it was that he cut that off before he could use it. And now he's just sort of completely done a 180. He's like, fuck these guys. Like, I want to know. So I think like that just sort of really shows how deeply this is sort of cut into him.
Yeah. I mean, should we talk about how we would react to this? And do we think Blake is reacting in an appropriate way to this? Because yes, his friends did basically talk about possibly having to kill him, which is pretty big betrayal. But having said that, these people don't, or at least at the time, didn't know who he was. And even now, getting to know him more and more, it seems to be implied that they're starting to feel guiltier and guiltier about what happened, about what they promised to Rose. Like, is this... I don't know, is it unfair of Blake to be holding them to such a high standard for a relationship that is obviously one-sided at this point in time?
Yeah, I mean, I sort of talked about that last chapter. I felt from where they were at the time. I mean, maybe the argument, I think Rose pretty much sets out when she makes some promise. She's like, so it turns out you guys are actually his friends and I've sort of ended up with you.
Well, yeah, that's fair.
And so that's definitely the thing that Blake would be able to hold onto and hold over them. But I do think he's underestimating how quickly he's maybe regrown on them. That's a tree pun.
Nice.
Like in this time. It's just... Yeah, I don't know. I can't really blame him. I mean, in this environment, sort of learning that, I can see why it hurts him so deeply. He doesn't have a chance to sort of stand back and look at it a bit more emotionally. A bit less emotionally. Like, it's some of those bits of like logic that we're pointing out. You can see why he just hasn't had time to really process those and calm down.
No, I totally love the idea that he hasn't had time to process it though, because this is the thing. Like, they're in the abyss, and this whole thing has to be framed through the context of the abyss intentionally showed him this, this vision to fuck with him. And so I can't help but see the way this chapter goes as Blake just doing exactly what the abyss hoped he would do.
That's very fair. Yeah, I agree. I just sort of remembered. I do think it's one of those things where I think if he talked to them about it, like maybe he could make, like just talk to them about it was something I was sort of yelling internally as I was reading this. But and that is a pet peeve of mine in most sorts of things. Like I remember that drove me nuts in Black Panther. That whole movie could have been over in 5 minutes if everyone had just had a conversation. But with this, I kind of get why, like, Blake couldn't possibly deal with talking to them and finding out that he's right. So I can kind of see why he's not doing it. And also, there's other shit to do. Like, this isn't a calm spot they're in right now. So, I get it. And it doesn't bother me like it does in a lot of other situations. But there's definitely this sort of sense of just, oh, Blake, please just ask them point blank, and then there won't be all these doubts. Like, just rip the Band-Aid off. But this Band-Aid, not the other one that you're about to rip off.
Yeah, I mean, they've obviously been playing it close to the vest about this being the thing that has been between them this whole time. But now that he knows, surely he can just be like, okay, look, the Abyss showed me this vision of this, and so I know, and, like, I still want to help you guys. I'm not going to fucking off-rose the first chance I get. Maybe the third or fourth chance we'll see, but,
Yeah, I think maybe their promises to Rose is arguably one reason for not talking to them, because if he does decide he wants to make a play against Rose, and not telling them is the way to do it.
Yeah. And then do we interpret that as he didn't tell them, so therefore he might make a play against Rose? Like,
I mean, I'm not willing to rule anything out after the way this chapter ends. I've no idea what to expect from Blake at the end of this.
Yeah. Blake, the other thing is, like you mentioned, Blake is really interpreting everything that happens in the worst possible light. And I think it's a bit unfair. Blake even himself thinks at one point, was it all in my head that they sounded less than genuine? And I think the answer to that is yes.
I do as well. I think, I mean, it'd be nice if he just talked to them. But everything we've seen, to me, seems to suggest that they're actually all pretty Team Blake. They have their concerns about him, but I think they do sort of like him and trust him to some degree.
Yeah.
And like, I think, wasn't Tiffany kind of a notoriously shit liar anyway? Like, I don't know. She seems genuinely kind of Team Blake, at least. I don't know.
It's interesting. The one that feels the least Team Blake actually is Alexis now. And I don't know if that's because of actual hard evidence or just because Blake feels the most betrayed by her.
Yeah, I think that's where Blake's focus is. I agree. I agree on both points. I think she's the one who's felt the least Team Blake, and I think that's probably because that's just where he's looking.
Yeah. So everybody realizes now they've fallen for a classic Blake trap, which is they don't actually know what they're doing now that they've achieved the immediate goal. So Peter's kind of like, so what are we actually doing here, folks?
Yeah, I mean, look, to be fair, they didn't really have many options when they did dive into this portal.
It's true.
So, it was very much a sort of, okay, well, we need to get the fuck out of here right now. Let's do this. But yeah, Peter, of course, now that they're sort of there, Peter's like, so what are we doing now? And everyone's like, I don't know.
Yeah, and so they, of course, have to improvise the next step of the plan. Classic Blake moves going on here. I love that Peter is the only one who really has a strong reaction to realizing that the air quotes adults in this situation, the Cabal and Blake, who kind of, I mean, the Thorbans have all assumed they kind of know what they're doing. And it's like finding out Santa doesn't exist. It's like, oh no, wait, you guys are actually just fucking improvising this as you go. Like, we don't have a plan.
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of satisfying and hilarious to watch Peter lose it as he's going with this, as he just sort of keeps hammering them with these questions. I think it's actually the third time he asks them where they're going that he finally gets a concrete answer, which I thought was nice. And then he just sort of, this moment of realization where he's like, these people have no idea what the fuck they're doing, and he just sort of fully loses it. Yeah,
anytime, this is a recurring theme, anytime I feel like Peter's doing some good shit, immediately Wildbow has to slip in, no, he's still a piece of shit. And that happens here. He immediately follows up his good questions and kind of badgering them to get at the next step of this plan by being a huge piece of shit, losing the plot, freaking out, and almost killing Kristoff.
Yeah, he goes from understandably frustrated at this situation to just kind of being a bit of a shit to a child, very rapidly. Like, as you said, it's sort of like, oh yeah, no, Peter has some good, oh fuck, what are you doing, Peter?
And every time it's Kristoff. Like, what is his problem with Kristoff? I don't understand.
Yeah, well, we get more of Kristoff in this chapter than we have in really anything else so far. So we'll talk a bit more about Kristoff as we go. But I don't know why Peter's so keen on shitting on him. Maybe just because, I mean, he's the only other child, and like, you're not going to fuck with Roxanne. She'll stab you. So that may just be he may just be picking on the weakest link, which is a shit move. But he's kind of a shit guy, so checks out.
Yep, adds up. And I like this too because Blake kind of tries to de-escalate this whole situation. He walks towards Peter and gets him to calm down. And, well, yeah, you're nodding along as I say de-escalate, as though that's not true. But I think from Blake's perspective, that's what he thinks he's doing, right? But Peter obviously gets the read off of Blake, where he is just like, Blake is in full-on angry boogeyman mode here. And even though he thinks he's trying to de-escalate, Peter clearly gets quite scared of Blake at this point. And so it's really interesting because we get this glimpse into what other people are seeing of Blake right now, and he's just not. He's in spooky monster mode.
I love how this, like, it's so clear. It was so clear to both of us, and it's so clear to readers that Blake is just kind of being terrifying here. But it's also clear to us that Blake doesn't really understand that. I think that's really good writing. Like, walking that line where we're just like, wow, Blake is terrifying them, and Blake's like, oh yeah, I was just sort of stepping to Peter a bit, putting him in his place. Yeah, I
walked towards him, basically, is the most aggressive thing Blake thinks that he does.
Well, he's like, oh, Peter looks terrified, but he's like, but then I just sort of stood there and stared at him, and it's like, that's terrifying too, Blake.
Yeah, it's interesting. And yeah, obviously, it's not going to get better for Blake. He's not going to be less spooky by the end of this chapter.
Nope.
Yeah, I don't know what Peter thought. I mean, presumably Peter thought he was going to, like, throw him off the building or something, which I don't think would have been the worst move, because Peter is being a huge dick, but it feels a bit extreme, maybe.
Yeah, I just don't think Blake, like, maybe realizes, like, there's a few bits where people sort of try to talk to Blake and the way they do it in this chapter makes me think he doesn't have his, like, seething anger as, like, hidden as he thinks. Like, I think it's maybe more obvious to everyone than he realizes that he's in a really fucking bad mood. And so it's probably that Peter was latching onto. Like, I don't know if Peter had any strong ideas of what Blake was going to do, but if Blake's clearly emanating anger and, like, sort of walking towards him, like, of course he's going to be afraid.
Yeah, and without knowing what that anger is coming from, I think it's reasonable for Peter to think that Blake is having a really strong reaction to him being aggressive towards Kristoff. Like, yeah. That makes sense. And seemingly, that's I mean, Alexis later talks to him and basically is like, oh, so you're not feeling good about being in the drains, huh? Because they obviously don't have a reason. Like, they don't know why Blake is freaking the fuck out so much.
Yeah, exactly. Like, from their perspective, Blake's just, for no reason, fucking jumped up 5 levels of being pissed off at everything.
Yeah, but it's like, again, this is the Abyss. This is what it's doing, right? We've had beats of Blake's, like, chest fluttering and getting more active. Like, I don't know. It just seems like the Abyss has brought him down here. It tried to bring him down here and he didn't come, but then he came down later anyway of his own free will. And now it's given him a little bit of a boogeyman injection and it's going to send him back up to fuck shit up. Like, it's all going perfectly to plan for this Abyss.
Yeah, and I mean, because there's no mention when he scares Peter of whether it, like, gives him a boost. Like, he sort of mentioned that before. And it's hard to know whether it's because, we're in the Abyss right now, so he doesn't get that, or whether he's just sort of so detached from himself right now and he's so full of anger and other power and stuff that he just didn't really notice. But it's hard not to believe that, as you said before, he's not just doing exactly what the Abyss wanted when it gave him this information.
Yeah. So Alexis is tending to Catherine's arm, and Alexis calls Blake over to help, and Blake is unable to speak. He can't talk to her. He just can't bring himself to do it. Until he eventually kind of starts letting on just how helpless he feels.
Yeah, this is sort of where he really begins to spiral. Like, he sort of flinches as Alexis makes, like, physical contact with him, and part of me was at first kind of like, oh, I mean, terrible, but also good. This is still Blake.
Yeah, that's an element of Blake. That's a core human Blake reaction.
Yeah, it's like, oh, it's, not the best type, but, I'll take anything I can get at this point. And then Blake's, in his narration, is sort of immediately, oh, but it wasn't for, like, my usual hang-ups. It's just because, like, I'm so angry at Alexis, I don't want her touching me. And you're like, oh, fuck.
Yeah.
Like, this is bad.
Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty strong indicator. This is one of the things that was the most kind of human and vulnerable about Blake from his backstory, and that has been replaced completely with boogeyman anger. So it's obviously a microcosm for what's happening in this chapter as a whole.
Yeah, and it gets your hopes up because it's been a while since we saw this sort of aversion to physical contact from Blake. Like, I think it's since he was in the drains because, he had Roxanne on his back last chapter. He's been grabbed by things. He's been coming out of the mirror for the last few arcs. Like, he hasn't shown that, so I instantly sort of leapt on it as, oh, this is a good thing, and then the book is immediately like, it's worse now, and we get that third beat in that we've talked about of his damn me, damn them, damn it all, the opening lines to the book. I think when we got the second beat, you mentioned that you thought the third beat would signify like a big change in Blake, and I mean, yes. Because the moment where this is included in the chapter, I think, is that moment where Blake just kind of moves beyond just being angry and just kind of gives up on being human. Yeah.
I kind of like it as a marker of... It feels like it's a marker of Blake at his most boogeyman-ish, right? The first one was the start of the story when he, as far as we know, came into existence. And this third one is the conclusion of the journey of what he was built to do, right? He was built to become this creature, and he's fully kind of leaned into it now. I don't know.
Yeah, it definitely...
It's not a good phrase to see pop up.
No, it does seem to be bookmarking the Blake Thorburn as we knew him. Like, it was the opening line, it was how we were introduced to him, and we see it here at the end as he sort of seems to leave his humanity behind. So, yeah.
Yeah. So Alexis accidentally stumbles upon what may possibly be the worst thing to say to Blake, which is, you don't need to dwell on the long term, she said. And like, I think Blake is interpreting everything in the worst possible way, but this is like, man, it's hard not to be like, yeah, Blake, this is really foreboding for her to have said this.
I actually, so it wasn't until you wrote this in the notes I actually saw the interpretation you just hinted at there. When I read this, I sort of took the nice read, which is, Alexis just sort of trying to like pep talk him, being like, hey, listen, like, we've got shit going on. You don't need to dwell on the long term. Just, you're here with us. And I do think that's what she meant, but you're right.
Oh,
the way
totally
Blake is sort of processing everything right now, of course, that's terrible phrasing. And he pretty much just sort of straight up calls that out. Also, I mean, you're having to tell Blake not to worry about the long term. Like, this is a sign that he's really losing it. Like,
but that's the thing. Like, it's interesting because kind of the whole story, we've wanted him to be more selfish, right? To be able to not selfish. Selfish is the wrong word because he has done some selfish things, but like to focus on building a healthy, sustainable life for himself. And it seems like he's finally thinking about that now, only because everything else has kind of fallen away.
Yeah, but it's not because, like, that's the thing. It's not because now he wants to look towards the future. It's because he's completely giving up on the future.
Yeah, which is, it's like a perversion of what we had wanted Blake to see, and kind of what Blake himself had wanted to do, right? Like,
I was just going to say, like, getting a perversion of what we wanted to see is such a fucking classic Wildbow move.
It is. It really is. It's sad more than anything. And I kind of see this line where Alexa says, you don't need to dwell on the long term. This to me is the thing that really sets Blake off, because he's talking about how he doesn't know what to do anymore. And that conversation is vulnerable and it could turn into a reconciliation or something. But Alexis says this and Blake interprets it in the worst possible way. And that means all he has left is being defensive and kind of flipping out from there.
Yeah.
I feel like this conversation could have gone well at this point, but just by chance, Alexis said the wrong thing and that's it, right?
Yeah, you got to pick your phrasing carefully in this world.
Yeah. So Blake starts to dig into this mindset. One of my favorite bits is Evan says, "You've got us." Blake opens his eyes. "I've got you," I said, not agreeing with him. You in the singular, which is cold. It means that he has completely written off the Cabal. So all he's got left is Evan and maybe Green Eyes. Yeah. It's like, okay. I don't know if we're jumping ahead or not, but let's just start getting into it, because this is the part of the chapter where we really start to see what's happening with Blake next.
Yeah.
I want to talk about his motivations, right? Because his original motivation was to survive when he first got introduced. And now it kind of turned into helping Rose and helping Rose and his friends once he got them kind of accidentally embroiled into the whole thing. And that's all slipped away, right? Blake kind of doesn't care about helping Rose anymore. He's lost the care for helping for his Cabal this chapter. And it also feels like he doesn't really care about surviving and getting out of this intact, right?
Well, no, I mean, given what he does in the end of this chapter, yes, like, absolutely.
And so the only motivation he has left is his promise to Evan to kill the bad things, right? To kill the monsters, which was a promise made of pure heart at the time, but obviously when you can change the definition of what the bad things are, this is the exact kind of motivation that leads you to becoming an evil monster, right?
Yeah, well, and it ties into what Rose was saying about why she thinks he was created, to, like, fight all the enemies. It was like, oh, you're just going to keep fighting until you run out of enemies. And it feels like he's really leaning into that aspect of himself, whether Rose was right or not.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I mean, wait, this is the point where you really start to realize Evan is the only thing tethering, like, Blake as not just being a boogeyman. Wait, Evan's the only thing keeping him from just fully monstering out at this point. It makes me...
I really think Blake could have redefined the Cabal as his enemies if he never had met Evan. Like, if Evan was never in the story and we got to this point, I reckon there's a pretty good chance Blake would just kill the Cabal. Like, I could see that from this Blake.
Oh, yeah. Like, especially given how Evan was really the only thing that gave him hope, even when he was, like, trapped in that mirror. Yeah, I mean, this actually just has me really fucking worried for Evan. Honestly, like, Evan is now the only thing kind of holding Blake down or back, or however you want to phrase it. And, like, if something happens to Evan, like, Blake's just going to lose it. And that makes me worry that something is going to happen to Evan.
Yeah, and then Blake just goes fully off the rails. Yeah. So, the other thing that we kind of should touch on here is Catherine's arm got broken, and it seems as though the fact that it was broken in the abyss meant that it's basically not healing, right? And there have been a few bits of things that don't heal in this chapter, and I feel like this one also is kind of an intentional parallel to something. And I don't know exactly what. It could be a few things. It could be Blake's relationship with the Cabal that is now broken and will never heal, or Blake's humanity itself. It feels like something is irreparably broken to match this arm, or multiple things are, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's just a sort of like physical manifestation of what we've talked about with the Abyss, which is things that are changed in there. You come out changed, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
And I mean, this is something that's come up a fair bit in Pact. Like the hyena, obviously, had like anti-healing properties. I think in Eamon's interlude, he had like a bite from a ghoul that never healed properly.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think there are just like a lot of things that leave unhealable wounds in this world, and of course, this like hellhole is one of them.
Yeah. So then it would stand to reason from that the wound in the friendship between Blake and his Cabal is a thing that will never heal, right? I mean, this is a wound that has been inflicted by the Abyss. Yeah. So Blake prepares to head out, and at this point kind of reveals that his new plan is to build himself a full-on boogeyman body. So he sends Ty and Green Eyes to go collect some branches and some bones, and they will build a new body for Blake to inhabit out of these branches and bones.
At first I was really excited he was doing this, because I was like, oh look, see, he hasn't given up. He's he's not just going to turn into a rage monster. He's trying to build himself a body. He wants to get into the world, and I mean, that wasn't exactly how it pans out. He's just given up on something else, not given up on everything.
Yeah, and I think the fact that he wants to take a physical form is so important as well, because ever since he's been in the mirror, he has been restricted, right? He's been restrained. He's had to be restrained.
Yeah.
He can't be endlessly aggressive. He has to kind of be kind of diplomatic, and he has to talk to people, and he has to kind of travel around, and he can't just go around doing random shit and fucking shit up. And he's been more protected as well, in the mirror. And he's given all that up, and that to me is like, it just means I just know he's just going to go around doing fucking whatever and attacking people willy-nilly, and it's just like, it's just not a good, I don't know, there's no good signs in this one, right? It's all red flags in this chapter.
Yeah, I'm terrified for what the rest of this arc is going to look like. I'm actually concerned that Arc 13 might be defined by Blake basically being the bad guy, and everyone else trying to rein him in. As he proves to everyone that like everything they were worried about from Thorburns is exactly correct.
Yeah. Yeah. And let's talk about this. So as soon as Blake says this, I'm kind of surprised. As soon as he says that he's building himself a body, I am kind of surprised how easily Ty and the rest of the Cabal go along with it. Like there's a bit later where they give each other looks, and Blake interprets it as like, oh, they're hesitant. I was right all along, blah, blah, blah. But I don't know. I mean, if I was in this situation, I would maybe be like, Blake, are you sure this is a good idea, buddy? But they're just kind of like, yeah, let's build you a body.
Yeah, they don't really hesitate that much, which he should be interpreting as a good sign, I think, but he's not in the headspace to do that.
No, he doesn't, of course.
No.
Yeah, I don't know. It puts me, you know what it puts me in mind of? It puts me in mind of that moment when Alexis baited him into exerting himself to protect her and then get shunted out of the house, Like it, and maybe I'm being a bit of a Blake Thorburn about this, but it does feel like he's being used as a weapon again, which I don't like. I don't know.
I mean, yeah, maybe. I think that is a fair read. I don't agree with it because I want them to be good. But I could see that being correct. Yeah,
I think we're too in his head to get an impartial view of this scene.
Yeah, exactly.
So I don't know.
Yeah.
So Ty and Green Eyes go off to collect a new body or some stuff to make a body, to build a body for Blake.
Mm-hmm.
And while they're away, Christoph basically seeks more info about becoming a practitioner, and everybody throws advice in, basically trying to ward him off of this, right?
Yeah, and I mean, this conversation's pretty heartbreaking because Christoph basically says his motivation right now is he just wants to be less human, presumably because he's mourning like fucking everything.
Yeah, he looks up to his cousin, I think, his cousin Blake, who also wants to be less human.
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing. Like, Blake's like, oh, no, you don't want to be, less human. And it's like, yeah, Blake, like...
He's not very self-aware, is he?
If only we could get him to talk into a mirror.
Yeah. You don't want to be less human, I said, as I built myself a boogeyman body.
Yeah. Christoph, you don't want to be less human. Now check this shit out.
Now check out my cool tree powers. No, but it's interesting because Blake does give him advice that cuts through, right? He basically says, this high school shit that is weighing you down, it exists for practitioners too, and it's worse. and this is what gets through to Christoph, right?
Yeah. No, it's interesting. I mean, we already sort of touched on this idea that the Thorburns in this chapter are always sort of the ones to get through to each other. Like, again, it's really what Blake says here that gets through to Christoph.
Yeah.
I wonder if, like, Rose will actually be the one to talk down Blake if he starts to rage. Like, that would be really powerful and also, like, completely
it doesn't
unexpected.
have to be Rose. It could be Uncle Paul.
I think considering his antagonism with Rose of late, I think that would be a very interesting angle if Rose ends up having to be the one to try and talk him down.
Interesting.
I mean, the first step in that plan would be convincing her to do that, I imagine, but yeah.
Yeah, but I don't think Blake sees this as a betrayal from Rose, right? Because it's hard not to see it from Rose's perspective as like, yeah, we are set against each other and we kind of have to be realistic about it. Blake is betrayed by his friends, but from Rose, I think he just kind of is like, yeah, that's the rules of the game. Like, I think he actually is not going to have as bad a relationship with Rose after this in the same way.
I would say he was already not very pro-Rose, and I don't think he seems extra anti-Rose at this point, but like they were hardly BFFs before this revelation. And
this is going to bring them closer together, Elliot.
I mean, what if it did?
Yeah. Well, we'll see, I guess. So there's one other thing I want to touch on here, which is basically after Blake talks Kristoff off of being a practitioner for a bit, we get these lines. I tuned out the ensuing discussion. A handful of minutes passed. And I want to talk about this because, and maybe it's reading too deep into it, but reading this, it stood out to me as the most overt example of Blake just kind of tuning out for a while. And of course he does that sometimes and he kind of gets lost in his own thoughts, but it really feels the most on the nose that it's been in the whole story so far. And it feels like Blake is tuning out because there's no conflict, there's no fighting, there's no arguing to do, and so he just kind of sits back and waits. Of course, it could be that this is just, Wildbow skipping over some boring conversation and to get to the next piece of action in this chapter, which is also, kind of expected. But I don't know, it just felt too on the nose in a way that I kind of read it as Blake. It was an intentional thing Blake is, or a subconscious thing Blake is doing now of just tuning out the boring conversations to wait for the conflict.
Well, I mean, the bit that he tunes out is when Tiff turns the conversation into like, oh, Kristoff, what do you do when you're not at school? Like, it's when they start talking about themselves as people. It's the human part of the conversation. Yeah. And that's the bit he tunes out. I think you're actually spot on. I think as the conversation turns to the more benign human stuff, that's just the bit that Blake just tunes out, and I think that that's very intentional.
And it's not just benign human stuff. It's, Kristoff, what's your goal in life? Where do you want to be? What's your future? Which is the thing that Blake has just decided to give up on. So,
yeah.
I don't know. I guess we should stay tuned into that, but it just felt like, like Blake is starting to actually completely, not just deny it for himself, but completely tune out of the idea of engaging in non-aggressive conversations with people.
Yeah.
So, Alexis wakes Roxanne from a nightmare, which has its grips on her, and she reacts poorly to this.
Yeah, I mean, so I guess we've already sort of touched on this earlier. Yeah. I think it's interesting that the Abyss is seemingly targeting Tiffany alongside Roxanne. I mean, it's honestly not a surprise to me that the Abyss picked Roxanne pretty quickly, like as a potential candidate for Boogeyman's ship. But Tiff is the more interesting one, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't hope that we get to see more of Tiff turning into a boogeyman, but I am interested by it. And we get this beat, like we mentioned, of Peter cutting through to Roxanne, and so he says, if it's any consolation, you're a Thorburn, you were never going to be okay in the first place. And this gets through to Roxanne and she calms down a bit, but Tiffany's reaction to it is to be appalled, and I absolutely love it. It's so perfectly, like, it's a horrifying thing to say, and it would only calm down a Thorburn, and of course Peter knows this and says it. And so of course Tiffany is appalled, but it works, and that's the beauty of it, right?
Yeah, the concept of like Roxanne freaking out saying she's never going to be okay again, because this dream's presumably shown her something about the future that has like harrowed her. And like Peter's just sort of like, well, you were never going to be okay? And as a Thorburn, she's like, oh yeah. And, like, for a normal person, it's just like, what the fuck?
Yeah, exactly. It's awesome. It's so good. Man, I love Peter. And this time he doesn't even do a horrifying thing to follow it up. So, congratulations,
well, he mixed
Peter.
the horrifying thing into the good thing this time.
Yeah, true. So, yeah. So, Green Eyes and Ty return. They've got a lot of sticks, and they even have a few human, thank God. I mean, could be worse, right? Human bones.
I mean, I love the delivery from Green Eyes on, like, no, these are human bones. And everyone's like, okay.
Yay!
I mean, not to get my tinfoil hat on too much, but it's interesting how well things went for them with the Briar Girl right here. They just sort of got out, and the Bri girl's like, yeah, it's cool, give me a little gift, and oh, by the way, here's this coincidental pile of human bones.
Here's this pile of trash bones. Yeah.
I don't know, that feels like karma or something. I'm unsure exactly what to make of this, but it stood out to me as just like, that went very well.
Yeah. Do you think that Bri girl is trying to claim some part of Boogie Blake now, or?
I mean, maybe. I'm so interested. Bri Girl's been set up since Breach as like having that teacher and something. I feel like there's going to be some twist related to Bri Girl in the future, and maybe that'll make it clear why she might have had stakes in what's going on here, or how she would have even known to have stakes in what's going on here as well.
Yeah. The other thing that happens here is they seem to make a deal with the defenestration boogeyman from last chapter.
Yeah, he's back, the creepy motherfucker.
Yay! No, yeah, and they full on are like setting a boogeyman free to go after an enemy, right? In what is possibly the most cold-blooded time they've ever done that. Like they don't even question it. They're just like, "Yep, you're free as long as you go and fuck up some Bahams or some Duchamps." Hop to it. And he's like, okie dokie. So yeah, I don't know. It's not great. Blake isn't the only one losing some humanity here, I would say.
Yeah, well, they've just full on turned into those sorts of practitioners who drop down and seal up some boogeyman, like the people who nabbed up Midge. Like they sign him up to what I assume was the Seal of Solomon.
Yeah, it seemed like it, didn't it?
Yeah, but we only get sort of a one-sentence summary of Tiff as to what the rules and guidelines surrounding him are. She's just sort of like, oh, you can only hurt like Bahams and Duchamps that are adults. Which is, I don't know. Like it reminds me of the first time Midge came out, and the phrasing wasn't good enough. Like I don't know. I think this is going to come back to bite them. This is definitely Chekhov's defenestrator.
I mean, we'll see. I guess.
Yeah.
Put a pin in it. I don't know. We'll see. Also, interesting crossover. Blake isn't going to be in the windows anymore, but that would have been such a good showdown, right? Like, guy that lives in a window versus guy who throws people out of windows. Who's going to win, right?
Well, you can't push Blake out of the window. He is the window.
Well, I mean, maybe when he had his first run-in with Defenestration Man, he set all these events into motion, and Blake getting a physical body is just the next step of him being defenestrated.
It's all part of his master plan.
It was a high-level plan. Before you can defenestrate him, he needs to be out of the window, so...
The defenestration man was the one who had a chat with Bri Girl. I don't know. It's gonna be very fun. I think like there's no way that at least releasing the defenestrator like this isn't gonna like do something. I don't know. Even if he gets caught by the Bahams and bounce back at them or something, it's gonna be interesting.
Yeah, we'll see. So with these twigs and bones, everyone does some Blake bodybuilding, and he rips out his parts of himself and sticks them in to inhabit it, ending with his heart that he kind of takes out and flops into the body.
I mean, it's a pretty epic moment. It's very well written. Like, it reminds me of his escape from the drains back in 9-5 or whatever. As he's sort of, poetically saying all this stuff about why he's doing this and literally tearing himself apart and jamming it into this effigy they've made. I quickly want to touch on, before we go further into that, Christoph is here and works himself pretty raw on putting together this body. Like, everyone else is taking breaks, and Christoph is like, nope, I'm going to keep working beyond when it's healthy because I'm after revenge. And we've already touched on how Christoph's motivations were mirroring Blake's a bit earlier, so this has me very worried. I mean, I don't know it's hard to predict what's going to happen with Christoph, but it definitely feels like he's following in Blake's footsteps a bit too much. Yeah.
So Blake does go through his motivations as he puts himself into this new body, and one of them is, I'm moving forward for my friends, right? And let's just put aside the fact that he says moving forward, because I don't think that's correct, but when he says friends, it's italicized. So friends, plural, but italicized. And I don't know who he's referring to, right? Like
Evan's the
obviously is being referred to. Yeah. And then I think Green Eyes and Mags are probably the other two safe bets here, but it feels like this is it feels like Blake is thinking this because he has something in mind that he's going to do.
Yes, absolutely. Like, I think this is something that's going to make sense to me in a couple of chapters when I've seen what Blake has wrought.
Yeah. Yeah, it's nerve-wracking, to be honest.
Yeah.
And then, of course, Blake says, I'm going to kill the monsters. I'm sufficiently convinced that those bastards out there, presumably referring to the council, that those bastards out there are monstrous enough to qualify. So yeah, Blake is fully he just exists now to kill these people, and he's very justified in it. And I don't know, he's just like fully embracing the monster.
Yeah, at first I actually just thought he meant all the monsters literally in the house, but you're right, I think he probably means more than that. I'm starting to question whether we even call him Blake anymore. Like, moving into the next chapter, I think he'll just be the Thorburn boogeyman to me, until I see reason to suggest otherwise.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm going to call him Blake for brevity reasons, but I agree with you.
Fair.
So Blake inhabits his new body and kind of starts to stand up, and with Evan and Green Eyes in tow, they head together back to the house. So Blake is just not a human anymore, right?
Yep.
He's fully embraced it.
This is really drilled into us. I'm just going to read out the last sentence and also the last paragraph. It's a one sentence paragraph that ends the chapter, which is, without looking back at the humans, I headed in the direction of the house. Evan flying alongside me, Green Eyes crawling through the snow. So obviously Blake here explicitly separates himself from the concept of humans, and then is moving with the others of the group. So it's hard not to read the end of this chapter as this isn't human Blake anymore. This is other Blake.
Yeah. And I think there's one piece of hope left, right? Which is Blake explicitly calls out that he still has a small amount of flesh left.
Yeah.
Some flesh grows into his new body. And obviously, flesh is humanity and tree is boogeyman, right? That's kind of been set up for us. As Blake has turned more and more boogeyman, he's lost more and more flesh. And so as long as there's still some flesh, there's some hope that Blake can get back to being a semblance of his human self, but it feels pretty slim at this point.
Yeah, and of course, because there's not much flesh. I think you're right. Like, I think this is meant to be our shred of hope that there's still some Blake in there. Just sort of looking at it from a Doyleist perspective, I don't think the rest of this story is going to be from the perspective of a heartless monster. I think there will be some sort of redemption-y arc. I'm just worried for what's going to happen between now and the start of that. Yeah, but it's so hard with a lot of this stuff as well at the moment, because Blake is so far detached from his own emotions that you can't really say too much about exactly what he's thinking.
I mean, they're not his emotions anymore, right? Yeah, exactly. He's left those behind.
True.
And that's the end of this chapter, but it's not the end of this arc, which is very interesting to me, because this is pretty big, and we still have 2 chapters left for things to get, for things to continue to descend into the depths of madness before the arc ends with a nice, refreshing interlude. So I don't know what the fuck's gonna happen.
I can't wait to read the chapter tomorrow. I'm so pumped.
But that's the end of Duress 12.6. Which means it's time for us to go back around and, speaking of monsters, talk about our discussion question, which was for people to give us kind of backstories behind the boogeymen behind their local myths and urban legends.
Yeah, and we got a bunch of great...
Yeah, there were some really good ones.
Yeah, so I think one of the first ones I wanted to call out, a bit of a joke answer, but it was from Coffee Carafe, who came up with a sort of boogeyman version of Florida Man, from the news, which was a bit of fun. I really liked this one. Yeah, I like this.
And I feel like it, even though it is a bit of a meme, I feel like it could work in the Pact universe as an embodiment of that kind of Florida energy that manifests itself as a humanoid other.
Yeah, I'd almost think this is maybe less of a boogeyman and more of an incarnation type deal.
Yeah, totally. The incarnation of Florida.
Yeah, I mean, the concept's just as hilarious either way.
Yeah. Yeah, it's awesome. I want to call out one from Brawl97, who posted two actually, but the first one that they posted in one of our, I think it was in 12.3 discussion threads, was talking about, and it wasn't even a monster. It was basically a person that kind of took on a bit of a mythical status around their town, and it was this man, this homeless man, who would just kind of pop up out of nowhere and talk to people, and seemed a little bit off, but not threatening, I would say. And it was just this really interesting tale of a person who seemed to take on some larger than life qualities and then vanished, right? And then their legend kind of lived on. And I love this because it's the seed of an other. It's the seed of a person who was slightly otherish enough that they developed a bit of a legend. And as that legend gains power, they will come back and they will be something, who knows what. Yeah, it was great. I loved it. And I think this was the answer that really emphasized to me that we accidentally just set up a little episode of Do the Right Thing, and I'm totally on board for that. Like, it's great. I love it. I love more Pact themed Do the Right Things.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what we accidentally did. Yeah, I mean, there were a couple of others that sort of stood out to me. Flower Priest did one called The Coward Statue, which was very, like, SCP-esque.
Oh, yeah, totally. Yes, this one was about kind of statues of soldiers that you see everywhere. And one of them was not actually a brave soldier, but was a coward who, for some reason, got immortalized. And because of this, they kind of, anyone who pays deference to this statue takes home a piece of this. I think the reason I felt it was very SCP-esque was they used the word mimetic, which to me just triggers SCP memories. But yeah, it was a great story about what might happen in that situation and the other that might be born from that situation. I want to call out this one by Sohibum7, who used to live in a town with a kind of relatively notorious suicide bridge, which I think is something that lends itself to very creepy boogeyman-esque tales.
Yeah.
And so Sohibum kind of theorizes about who the first potential victim of this suicide bridge was, and how they kind of became the troll that lived under that bridge, the spirit of the bridge that then helped it to develop into more of a negative energy kind of place, feeding off of unhappy people who visited.
Yeah, I like what I liked about this answer was like something that was sort of, we got a lot more of than I expected. I really expected people to latch onto the idea of like a person or a monster. But people really sort of latched onto more like concepts. Like obviously we had sort of, the idea of the Florida man and sort of, things that are maybe more incarnations or whatever than sorts of boogeyman like Blake.
Yeah.
But like, so Hypermum's here's come up with the idea of like a concept of a place. And I like the idea that just the way negative energy like would infect this place and turn it into something terrible, like that's just so packed. It's really cool.
Yeah, definitely. I think one other one that I want to touch on was also by Brawl97, who basically tells this story of a guy called James Still. And actually, when I first read this comment, I thought this was a completely original like work of fiction by Brawl97 because it so perfectly sets up a boogeyman, right? So James Still was this doctor, an African-American doctor who lived in New Jersey, and I think was like sold into slavery by his parents or something like that, but kind of learned medicine and started practicing medicine kind of illegitimately, or he was relatively good at medicine, but he wasn't obviously able to practice medicine officially because he was black, right? And so he would kind of give medical care to people for free, and then died. And the circumstances around his death are unknown, but afterwards there just kind of arose these legends of his ghost providing medical care to stranded travelers. And this is such a perfect origin story for a boogeyman, and that I thought it was just completely original. But no, this James Still was a person who lived, and this local legend does exist in New Jersey, and it's great. It's such a perfect like urban legend that fits so well into this kind of Pact vibe. I thought it was a great example.
Yeah, absolutely. And then sort of the last one we've got here, it was sent to us sort of from Jay Maniac via our Discord. And Jay talked about the Black Volga, which is like this real legend from Eastern Europe, and it's like this car that was being used by kind of whoever society was scapegoating at the time for causing all their
D&D
problems.
players, gamers.
That would be a nicer one than the real answers. But basically, this car was being used to abduct children. And Jay was sort of inspired by a road trip they recently went on, and wrote this, fantastic sort of short story about like a man driving a car and sort of losing attachment from the world and sort of ending up driving through the abyss for years. It was really great. And I mean, I think we've talked about Jay's live reads before on here, but they're honestly fantastic. And like they point out a bunch of stuff that we miss, honestly. And that's in our Discord. So it's join our Discord just for Jay's live reads, honestly.
Yeah, they are awesome for sure. This idea has really gotten me thinking about something that I want to see in Pact 2 when it comes out, and I know that's going to happen. Okay, it's happening. Which is, I think the idea of a highway would be the perfect setting for an abyss location. This highway where there are a bunch of cars and kind of endless traffic, and inside each car, it kind of feels kind of tenements to me, right? Inside these cars could be anything.
So Jay talked about the idea, like on their road trip, they were just going through, like, it was like they were the only car on the road, just like endless roads. Their headlights were sort of not lighting things properly, and they're like, that feels very abyss. And I was like, I can totally see that. The idea of these sorts of endless roads with nothing on them.
You once every few days, maybe you pass a car in the other direction. Yeah, who knows what the fuck's going to be inside it?
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. I really like that idea. But yeah, and so that ends discussion on all the great writing prompt answers we got for this question.
Yeah.
And so we're going to try this very innovative idea, which is we're going to try...
OC.
Yeah, we're going to try and run a discussion question each week. So as this discussion question ends, we're going to launch the next one, which will obviously be
tackled... That's a visionary idea.
Next Monday's episode. The discussion question we're hitting up this week is pick a character from the story and explain what element you think they would be associated with and why. So obviously,
no Blakes.
Yeah, obviously Blake is wood. Unless you can make a particularly interesting case for something else, I'd probably avoid that one. Obviously, Evan is like air tending towards fire, which is interesting. Green Eyes is maybe water.
Yeah, but the seed to me of this question is like, why is Blake wood? Like, obviously now we know why he's wood because he's a fucking tree man. But before he went into the abyss, before he became a tree man, what are his traits that meant he would become a wood boogeyman? Like, I'm so interested to hear what people have to say about that, and then extrapolating from that, what other characters have similar things that would allow them to fit into kind of elements.
Yeah, like just sort of a quick off the cuff one for me would be like Diane, the astrologer, might be metal because of how fandangled and new all her astrology is, and then I'd like try and work out more from there, I guess. But some interesting stuff like that. Like I think it's going to be a great way to explore the elements in Pact as well as the characters that people are analyzing.
Yeah, I think the elements haven't got enough. Like they're obviously one of the parts of the world that exist but aren't delved into too deeply.
Yeah, they very much fly under the radar.
And so just make stuff up, guys. It's not going to be deconfirmed, so go for it. Go nuts. And if you have answers to that discussion question, the place to leave it is in our discussion thread, which you can find by scrolling down in your podcast player and clicking the link to Reddit, which is where our discussion threads live.
Yes, and if you're a little disappointed that this week's discussion question is less of a creative writing prompt, you can satisfy that craving by heading over to doofmedia.com and looking up Do the Right Thing, which every week they have their own creative writing prompt, so you'll never be left wanting.
Yeah, it's like a discussion question, but they don't pretend that it's not just a creative writing prompt, like we do.
Exactly.
Yes. So the place to go to check that out is doofmedia.com. From Doof Media, you can also find links to other things, like our Twitter, which is @MediaMDPodcast. You can tweet at us, so you can see live reads of the chapters. If you want to see Elliot's reaction to that big crazy thing that happens next chapter, wink, then the Twitter is the place to go for that.
Yes, and we've already sort of touched on Doof has a Patreon, patreon.com/Doof Media. There's a ton of great perks. The best one, honestly, is at the $1 tier, and that's the Discord. And
Hmm.
there's, so much going on the Discord, including Jay's live reads, so check it out.
Now, I do agree that the Discord perk is the best one, and the second best perk is the $5 perk, where you get to participate in our Doof and Chill streams. And we just did one last weekend, and it was so much fun. We played Would I Lie to You, and we all lied to each other, and it was great. I mean, yeah, it's a game that practitioners just can't play, but we can, and it was great.
I did wonder that, actually, sort of early on in the story, as I was watching some Would I Lie to You, I was like, if a practitioner is told that they should lie for a game, does that mean they're allowed to? And I think by now I've settled on the answer no. But it's interesting, if you can contrive scenarios where the spirits are like, okay, no, for here you should do it.
But yeah, so the spirits obviously are kind of analogous to a literary reader, right? But I imagine if we're in a universe that was based around like a TV game show, the spirits there would be the studio audience, and so they'd be way more willing to accept stuff in the name of like it's all part of the fun and games, you know?
Yeah, maybe.
What we
Walbo has
yes.
a Patreon as well. Speaking of I don't know, good
Patreon,
things.
yeah.
Patreon.com/Walbo, and he writes the stories, and then we read the stories. It's off you go.
Yeah, speaking of lying, you shouldn't. No, that's not really a lie. Never mind. Oh yeah, speaking of lying, I don't want you to go to Warbo's Patreon. That
Nailed
was a
it.
lie. You should go do it.
And so on that note, we'll see you all on Friday the 25th for Duress 12.7.
Bye.